A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
My Weird Prompts is a community-driven initiative exploring how AI can fuel curiosity and uncover the fascinating ways our world works. GPU compute for this podcast is generously provided by Modal. Learn more at modal.com.
I was looking at the latest report from Hugging Face that dropped yesterday, March 23rd, 2026, and the numbers are just staggering. We have officially hit 2 million public models on the platform. But here is the kicker, Herman. Nearly 50% of all downloads, 49.6% to be exact, are coming from just 0.01% of those models. That is roughly 200 models dominating the entire global conversation. It is a massive power law where a tiny handful of giants like GPT 5.4 or Claude 4.6 dominate the charts, while nearly 2 million other models are sitting there in what people call the long tail. Today's prompt from Daniel is about this exact phenomenon, specifically looking at why anyone would bother with these niche models when the frontier giants are so capable. He wants us to use the new MiroThinker 1.7 release as a case study for why the era of the generalist might be hitting a wall.
It is the perfect timing for this, Korn. I have been diving into the MiroThinker 1.7 model card all morning. You mentioned the long tail, and for a lot of people, those 2 million models represent noise or failed experiments. But what we are seeing in March 2026 is that the long tail is where the actual innovation in agentic reasoning is happening. While the big labs are focused on making their models more polite, more conversational, or better at creative writing, groups like MiroMind AI are pivoting toward what they call verification-centric reasoning. They are not trying to win the benchmark for writing poetry or being a friendly therapist. They are trying to win the benchmark for actually getting work done without hallucinating. We are seeing a fundamental shift from the chatbot era, which was all about fluency, to the agentic era, which is all about accuracy and reliability.
You say they are not trying to win benchmarks, but the numbers Daniel sent over suggest they are doing exactly that, in very specific categories. The MiroThinker 1.7 Mini, which is only a 31 billion parameter model, somehow managed to score a 72.3 on the Browse CompSci Deep Research benchmark. For context, GPT 5.4 is sitting at 65.0, and Claude 4.6 Opus is at 62.4. How does a model that is a fraction of the size beat the smartest thing OpenAI has ever built? It feels like there is a trick here, or at least a very different philosophy at play. I mean, we are talking about a model that is likely 10 times smaller than the frontier giants.
The trick is the shift from scaling parameter count to scaling interaction quality. Most people still think about AAI in terms of the bigger the brain, the better the thoughts. But MiroThinker 1.7 is built on a mixture of experts architecture using Qwen 30 billion as the foundation. Instead of just predicting the next token and hoping for the best, it uses a dual system of local and global verifiers. Think of it as a writer who has an editor sitting over their shoulder for every single sentence. The generator proposes a reasoning step, and the verifier audits it in real time. If the step is logic deficient or contradicts the prompt's constraints, the model discards it and tries again before the user ever sees the output. That is how a 31 billion parameter model punches so far above its weight class. It is not smarter in a general sense. It probably cannot tell you a better joke than GPT 5.4, but it is much more disciplined.
So it is basically an AI with a conscience, or at least a very strict internal auditor. I can see why that would be appealing for heavy-duty agentic tasks. If I am asking an agent to handle 300 tool calls for a research project, I do not want it to wander off into a hallucination loop at step 10 and then spend the next 200 steps building on a lie. But why would a developer choose this over something like Claude 4.6 Opus? Anthropic has spent billions on safety and reliability. Is the long tail really more reliable than a frontier API?
Reliability is a multidimensional problem, Korn. When you use a Frontier API, you are getting a model that has been heavily RLH fed or reinforcement learning from human feedback to be a good chatbot. It is designed to be helpful, harmless, and honest in a conversational context. But that often comes at the cost of raw reasoning power or the ability to follow complex, non-standard instructions. The MiroThinker series is built for agents, not chatbots. It is designed to handle those 300 plus tool calls per task that you mentioned. In the community testing on the local LLAMA subreddit last week, specifically around March 12th, users were finding that the mini model could run on a single NVIDIA H100 GPU with incredible efficiency. That leads us to one of the biggest drivers for the long tail, local sovereignty.
You've been waiting to use that phrase, haven't you? Local sovereignty. It sounds like something a separatist movement would talk about, but I assume you mean keeping your data off the cloud and on your own hardware.
Guilty as charged. But it is a massive deal for enterprise users in 2026. If you are a financial firm doing stock analysis or a legal team auditing sensitive documents, you cannot just fire that data off to a third-party server, no matter how many privacy agreements they sign. The long tail allows these organizations to find a model that is hyper-specialized for their domain, like MiroThinker is for verifiable research, and run it entirely within their own firewall. You get the performance of a frontier model without the data leakage risks or the massive per token costs of a commercial API. Plus, you avoid the nerfing problem. We have all seen it. OpenAI or Anthropic updates their model to be safer or cheaper to run, and suddenly your carefully crafted prompts stop working. With a long tail model like MiroThinker, you own the weights. It does not change unless you want it to.
I get the privacy and stability angle, but let's talk about the risks. Daniel mentioned that while MiroThinker 1.7 is a beast at research, it still struggled with hallucinating facts about things like German election data. This is the trade-off, right? With the long tail, you are often dealing with models that have not been put through the same rigorous safety and fact-checking filters as the big corporate models. It is a use, at your own risk situation. Are we just trading one kind of error for another?
It is a different category of error. Frontier models tend to have what I call corporate hallucinations, where they refuse to answer a question because it is too spicy, or they give a bland, middle-of-the-road answer that is technically safe but practically useless. Niche models like MiroThinker are often more unfiltered. They are designed for raw intellectual work. The hallucination with the German election data is a classic example of a gap in the training data or a failure in the retrieval augmented generation pipeline. But for a developer who understands the architecture, that is a bug they can work around by improving their local verifiers or refining their data sources. You cannot fix a frontier model because you do not own the weights. With a long tail model, you are the mechanic. You can open the hood and tune the engine. If it fails on German elections, you can fine-tune a LoRa, a low-rank adaptation, specifically for European political data and fix it yourself.
Speaking of tuning the engine, I want to go back to this idea of verification-centric reasoning. You mentioned local and global verifiers. Can you break down how that actually works in practice? Because if this is the secret sauce that lets a 31 billion parameter model beat GPT 5.4, we should probably understand the mechanism.
It is a fascinating approach that MiroMind AI officially unveiled between March 11th and 16th. Traditionally, we have relied on the model's internal weights to hold all the truth. But MiroThinker uses a process where, for every reasoning step, the model generates multiple potential paths. A local verifier, which is a smaller, specialized scoring model, evaluates those paths based on logical consistency and adherence to the prompt's constraints. Only the highest scoring path is kept. Then, at the end of a multi-step task, a global verifier looks at the entire chain of thought to ensure the final conclusion actually follows from the starting point. This is a massive shift away from the brute force trial and error we used to see in agents. We are moving from models that just talk to models that actually think about what they are saying before they say it. It reminds me of the agentic scale we talked about back in episode 1407 when we looked at Mirofish. We are seeing that same philosophy of autonomous, verifiable work being miniaturized into these 31 billion parameter models that can run on consumer-grade hardware.
It is funny you mentioned Mirofish because that was all about simulating a million minds at once. Now we are talking about making one single mind more rigorous. It feels like the industry is consolidating its gains. We went broad, and now we are going deep. But there was another point in Daniel's prompt that caught my eye, and it is a bit more existential. He mentioned a study in Nature from January 2026 about model collapse and cognitive shrinkage. The idea is that as we use more synthetic data to train these models, they start to lose the rare event distributions. They basically become more and more average until they collapse into cognitive entropy. Is the long tail our only defense against this?
That study was a wake-up call for the entire industry. If every model is just trained on the output of GPT-4 or GPT-5, we end up in a feedback loop where the AI is just eating its own tail. We lose the diversity of thought, the weird edge cases, and the specialized knowledge that makes human intelligence so robust. The long tail on Hugging Face is essentially a seed vault for cognitive diversity. We have 2 million models, many of which are fine-tuned on hyper-specific human-curated datasets that the frontier models might never see. If we lose the long tail, we lose the ability to train future models on anything other than a sterilized, homogenized version of the internet. We need those niche models for financial prediction, legal document auditing, and even things like ancient language translation to keep the AI ecosystem healthy. Think about a financial prediction model. It needs to understand the black swan events, the outliers. A general model trained on average internet data will naturally smooth those outliers out.
So the long tail is not just about choosing a smaller model for your project. It is about maintaining the biological diversity of the digital world. That is a heavy responsibility for a bunch of developers on a subreddit. But let's get practical for a second. If I am a developer or a researcher listening to this, and I have been relying on the Claude or OpenAI APIs, how do I actually start engaging with the long tail? It seems overwhelming to sort through 2 million models to find the one that works for my specific task.
You have to change how you audit models. Most people just go to the top of the leaderboard and pick the one with the highest overall score. But in 2026, that is a mistake. You should be looking for models with specific verification architectures. If you are building an agent, you want something like MiroThinker that is built for tool use in multi-step reasoning. You should also be looking at the foundation. The rise of Chinese models like Qwen and DeepSeek has been a huge story this year. In fact, as of this month, Chinese models have actually surpassed US models in monthly download volume on Hugging Face. We talked about this a bit in episode 1471 with the cursor incident, where people realized that the best coding tools were actually using Chinese models under the hood. The long tail is where you find those specialized variants that have been fine-tuned for your specific language, your specific industry, or your specific hardware constraints.
I am curious about the hardware side of things. You mentioned the MiroThinker Mini running on an H100. For a lot of smaller shops, even an H100 is a big investment. Is there a version of this for people who are not swimming in GPU credits?
The beauty of the 31 billion parameter scale is that it is the sweet spot for quantization. You can run a quantized version of MiroThinker 1.7 Mini on much more modest hardware, like a high-end Mac or a couple of consumer-grade gaming cards, and still get that high-level reasoning performance. That is the unique value proposition here. You are not just getting a model, you are getting independence. You are not at the mercy of a giant corporation's pricing changes, or their decision to suddenly nerf a model's capabilities to save on compute costs. When you run a long-tail model locally, you own the performance. And with 13 million users now on Hugging Face, the community support for running these models on consumer hardware has never been better.
It sounds like we're moving into a world where the generalist models are like the public utility, and the long-tail models are like your own specialized toolkit. You use the utility for basic stuff, but when you need to build something serious, you reach for the specialized tools. But what about the agent versus chatbot divide you mentioned earlier? MiroMind is claiming the chatbot era is ending. That feels like a bold claim when everyone and their grandmother is still talking to ChatGPT.
It is bold, but I think they are right. A chatbot is a passive interface. You ask it a question, it gives you an answer. An agent is an active system. You give it a goal, and it uses tools, browses the web, and executes code to achieve that goal. The MiroThinker H1 model, which is the flagship 235 billion parameter version, scored an 88.2 on the Browse CompsI H benchmark. That is not just a little better than a chatbot. That is a completely different category of intelligence. It is the difference between a person who can tell you how to build a house and a person who actually shows up with a hammer and does it. The long tail is where the hammers are being forged. We are seeing models that are designed from the ground up to be the brain of an autonomous system rather than just a conversationalist.
I suppose that explains the 300 tool calls. A chatbot doesn't need to call 300 tools to tell you a joke or write a summary, but an agent doing a deep dive into global supply chain logistics might. I want to touch on the domain specialization piece one more time. We have talked about finance and law, but what are some of the weirder parts of the long tail that you've come across?
Oh, it gets incredibly specific. There are models on Hugging Face right now that are fine-tuned solely for interpreting satellite imagery to predict crop yields in sub-Saharan Africa. There are models designed to audit smart contracts for very specific vulnerabilities that general models miss. There is even a sub-community building what they call unfiltered reasoning models for scientific research, where they want the AI to explore hypotheses that might be considered controversial or outside the mainstream. The long tail is where the edge of human knowledge meets the edge of AI capability. It is where you go when the general answer is no longer enough.
It is basically the digital version of a highly specialized graduate school. You go to the frontier models for your undergraduate degree, but when you want a PhD in a very specific niche, you go to the long tail. So, if we are looking at the future, do you think this consolidation of downloads into the top 0.01% is going to continue? Or is the long tail going to start eating into the giant's market share?
I think we are going to see a bifurcation. The giants will continue to dominate the consumer market because most people just want a helpful assistant on their phone. But for the professional, industrial, and scientific markets, the long tail is going to be the dominant force. The economics of running a specialized 31 billion parameter model that you own will always beat the economics of paying a tax to a frontier lab for every single thought your agent has. Plus, as we see more of this cognitive shrinkage in the general models due to synthetic data loops, the value of those diverse niche models is only going to go up. They are the genetic diversity of the AI world.
It is a compelling argument. It makes me want to go and browse the last few pages of the Hugging Face search results just to see what is hiding back there. Let's move into some practical takeaways for the people who are ready to take the plunge into the long tail. If someone wants to start experimenting with something like MiroThinker 1.7, what is the first step?
The first step is to stop looking at the general benchmarks. If you are working on a specific project, build your own small representative evaluation set. Take 10 or 20 complex tasks that are typical for your workflow and run them through a few different models from the long tail. You might find that a model with 0 hype and 10 downloads actually outperforms GPT 5.4 on your specific data. Second, look into low-rank adaptation, or low-RAS. Instead of trying to find the perfect pre-trained model, find a solid foundation like MiroThinker and then apply a specialized LoRa for your domain. It is a much more efficient way to get peak performance. And finally, invest in your local infrastructure. Even a modest setup with a couple of high-end GPUs can give you a level of freedom and performance that you just cannot get from a cloud API.
And I would add to that, do not be afraid of the technical weeds. The long tail requires a bit more hands-on effort than just hitting an API endpoint, but that is where the competitive advantage lives. If everyone is using the same 3 frontier models, everyone is going to have the same capabilities and the same blind spots. The long tail is where you find the unique angle that nobody else has considered.
I love that. It is about finding the blind spots of the giants. And that is exactly what MiroMind is doing with this verification-centric approach. They saw that the big models were struggling with consistency and hallucination in complex tasks, and they built a specific architectural solution for it. They didn't just try to make the model bigger, they made it better at checking its own work.
It is a good reminder that progress in AI isn't just a straight line of more data and more compute. Sometimes it is about a clever shift in how we structure the interaction. Before we wrap this up, Ermin, what is the one thing about the MiroThinker release that actually surprised you? Not the stuff in the marketing materials, but the stuff you found when you looked at the actual weights and the community feedback.
What surprised me was the efficiency of the mixture of experts' implementation. Usually, when you have a mixture of experts, there is a significant overhead in terms of memory and latency. But they have optimized this 31 billion parameter mini model to the point where the switching between experts is almost invisible. It feels like a monolithic model in terms of speed, but it has the specialized knowledge of a much larger system. It shows that we are still finding ways to squeeze more intelligence out of every single transistor.
It is a fascinating era to be watching. We are moving from the chatbot era into the agentic era, and it looks like the long tail of Hugging Face is going to be the engine room for that transition. Daniel, thanks for the prompt. It was a great excuse to finally dig into what MiroMind has been cooking up.
It really was. There is so much more to explore in those 2 million models, but MiroThinker is a great poster child for why the long tail matters.
Well, that is our deep dive into the long tail of AI. If you want to see the benchmarks we mentioned or find the links to the MiroThinker model cards, head over to my weirdprompts.com. We have all the show notes and the archive of our past episodes there.
Thanks as always to our producer Hilbert Flumingtop for keeping the gears turning behind the scenes. And a big thanks to Modal for providing the GPU credits that allow us to run these kinds of experiments and generate this show.
If you're finding value in these discussions, a quick review on your podcast app of choice really helps us reach more people who are interested in the deeper side of the AI ecosystem.
This has been My Weird Props. We will catch you in the next one.
See ya.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My Weird Prompts, where our thoughts go from slow takes to facts on cue. We change and fall.